History and Nature. The history of planet Earth. The history of Earth concerns the development of planet Earth from its formation to the present day. Nearly all branches of natural science have contributed to understanding of the main events of Earth's past, characterized by constant geological change and biological evolution. The geological timescale, GTS, as defined by international convention, depicts the large spans of time from the beginning of the Earth to the present, and its divisions chronicle some definitive events of Earth history. In the graphic, Ma means million years ago. Earth formed around 4.54 billion years ago, approximately one-third the age of the universe, by accretion from the solar nebula. Volcanic outgassing probably created the primordial atmosphere and then the ocean, but the early atmosphere contained almost no oxygen. Much of the Earth was molten because of frequent collisions with other bodies, which led to extreme volcanism. While the Earth was in its earliest stage, early Earth, a giant impact collision with a planet-sized body named Theia is thought to have formed the Moon. Over time, the Earth cooled, causing the formation of a solid crust and allowing liquid water on the surface. In June 2023, scientists reported evidence that the planet Earth may have formed in just 3 million years, much faster than the 10 to 100 million years thought earlier. The Hadean Eon represents the time before a reliable, fossil, record of life. It began with the formation of the planet and ended 4.0 billion years ago. The following Archean and Proterozoic eons produced the beginnings of life on Earth and its earliest evolution. The succeeding eon is the Phanerozoic, divided into 3 eras: the Paleozoic, an era of arthropods, fishes, and the first life on land; the Mesozoic, which spanned the rise, reign, and climactic extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs; and the Cenozoic, which saw the rise of mammals. Recognizable humans emerged at most 2 million years ago, a vanishingly small period on the geological scale. The earliest undisputed evidence of life on Earth dates at least from 3.5 billion years ago, during the Eoarchean era, after a geological crust started to solidify following the earlier molten Hadean Eon. There are microbial mat fossils such as stromatolites found in 3.48 billion-year-old sandstone discovered in Western Australia. Other early physical evidence of a biogenic substance is graphite in 3.7 billion-year-old metasedimentary rocks discovered in southwestern Greenland, as well as remains of biotic life found in 4.1 billion-year-old rocks in Western Australia. According to one of the researchers, if life arose relatively quickly on Earth, then it could be common in the universe. Photosynthetic organisms appeared between 3.2 and 2.4 billion years ago and began enriching the atmosphere with oxygen. Life remained mostly small and microscopic until about 580 million years ago, when complex multicellular life arose, developed over time, and culminated in the Cambrian explosion about 538.8 million years ago. This sudden diversification of life forms produced most of the major phyla known today, and divided the Proterozoic Eon from the Cambrian period of the Paleozoic era. It is estimated that 99% of all species that ever lived on Earth, over 5 billion, have gone extinct. Estimates on the number of Earth's current species range from 10 million to 14 million, of which about 1.2 million are documented, but over 86% have not been described. However, it was recently claimed that 1 trillion species currently live on Earth, with only 0.001% described. The Earth's crust has constantly changed since its formation, as has life since its first appearance. Species continue to evolve, taking on new forms, splitting into daughter species, or going extinct in the face of ever-changing physical environments. The process of plate tectonics continues to shape the Earth's continents and oceans and the life they harbor. Eons. In geochronology, time is generally measured in Maya, million years ago, each unit representing the period of approximately 1 million years in the past. The history of Earth is divided into 4 great eons, starting 4,540 Maya with the formation of the planet. Each eon saw the most significant changes in Earth's composition, climate and life. Each eon is subsequently divided into eras, which in turn are divided into periods, which are further divided into epochs. The Earth is formed out of debris around the solar protoplanetary disk. There is no life. Temperatures are extremely hot, with frequent volcanic activity and hellish-looking environments, hence the Aeon's name, which comes from Hades. The atmosphere is nebular. Possible early oceans or bodies of liquid water. The Moon is formed around this time, probably due to a protoplanet's collision into Earth. Archean 4000 to 2500 prokaryote life, the first form of life, emerges at the very beginning of this Aeon, in a process known as abiogenesis. The continents of Ur, Valbara and Kennerland may have existed around this time. The atmosphere is composed of volcanic and greenhouse gases. Proterozoic 2500 to 538.8. The name of this Aeon means early life. Eukaryotes, a more complex form of life, emerge, including some forms of multicellular organisms. Bacteria begin producing oxygen, shaping the third and current of Earth's atmospheres. Plants, later animals and possibly earlier forms of fungi form around this time. The early and late phases of this Aeon may have undergone snowball Earth periods, in which all of the planet suffered below zero temperatures. The early continents of Columbia, Rodinia, and Pannotia, in that order, may have existed in this Aeon. Phanerozoic 538.8. Present complex life, including vertebrates, begin to dominate the Earth's ocean in a process known as the Cambrian explosion. Pangaea forms and later dissolves into Laurasia and Gondwana, which in turn dissolve into the current continents. Gradually, life expands to land and familiar forms of plants, animals and fungi begin appearing, including annelids, insects and reptiles, hence the Aeon's name, which means visible life. Several mass extinctions occur, among which birds, the descendants of non-avian dinosaurs, and more recently mammals emerge. Modern animals, including humans, evolve at the most recent phases of this Aeon. Geologic timescale. Main article, Geologic timescale. The history of the Earth can be organized chronologically according to the geologic timescale, which is split into intervals based on stratigraphic analysis. The following 5 timelines show the geologic time scale to scale. The first shows the entire time from the formation of the Earth to the present, but this gives little space for the most recent Aeon. The second timeline shows an expanded view of the most recent Aeon. In a similar way, the most recent era is expanded in the third timeline, the most recent period is expanded in the fourth timeline, and the most recent epoch is expanded in the fifth timeline. Solar system formation. The standard model for the formation of the solar system, including the Earth, is the solar nebula hypothesis. In this model, the solar system formed from a large, rotating cloud of interstellar dust and gas called the solar nebula. It was composed of hydrogen and helium created shortly after the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, and heavier elements ejected by supernovae. About 4.5 Ga, the nebula began a contraction that may have been triggered by the shock wave from a nearby supernova. A shock wave would have also made the nebula rotate. As the cloud began to accelerate, its angular momentum, gravity, and inertia flattened it into a protoplanetary disk perpendicular to its axis of rotation. Small perturbations due to collisions and the angular momentum of other large debris created the means by which kilometer-sized protoplanets began to form, orbiting the nebular center. The center of the nebula, not having much angular momentum, collapsed rapidly, the compression heating it until nuclear fusion of hydrogen into helium began. After more contraction, a T Tauri star ignited and evolved into the Sun. Meanwhile, in the outer part of the nebula, gravity caused matter to condense around density perturbations and dust particles, and the rest of the protoplanetary disk began separating into rings. In a process known as runaway accretion, successively larger fragments of dust and debris clumped together to form planets. Earth formed in this manner about 4.54 billion years ago, with an uncertainty of 1%, and was largely completed within 10 to 20 million years. In June 2023, scientists reported evidence that the planet Earth may have formed in just 3 million years, much faster than the 10 to 100 million years thought earlier. Nonetheless, the solar wind of the newly formed T Tauri star cleared out most of the material in the disk that had not already condensed into larger bodies. The same process is expected to produce accretion disks around virtually all newly forming stars in the universe, some of which yield planets. The proto-Earth grew by accretion until its interior was hot enough to melt the heavy, siderophile metals. Having higher densities than the silicates, these metals sank. This so-called iron catastrophe resulted in the separation of a primitive mantle and a metallic core only 10 million years after the Earth began to form, producing the layered structure of Earth and setting up the formation of Earth's magnetic field. J. A. Jacobs was the first to suggest that Earth's inner core, a solid center distinct from the liquid outer core, is freezing and growing out of the liquid outer core due to the gradual cooling of Earth's interior, about 100 degrees Celsius per billion years. Hadean and Archean eons. The first eon in Earth's history, the Hadean, begins with the Earth's formation and is followed by the Archean eon at 3.8 Ga, 145. The oldest rocks found on Earth date to about 4.0 Ga, and the oldest detrital zircon crystals in rocks to about 4.4 Ga, soon after the formation of the Earth's crust and the Earth itself. The giant impact hypothesis for the Moon's formation states that shortly after formation of an initial crust, the proto-Earth was impacted by a smaller protoplanet, which ejected part of the mantle and crust into space and created the Moon. From crater counts on other celestial bodies, it is inferred that a period of intense meteorite impacts, called the Late Heavy Bombardment, began about 4.1 Ga and concluded around 3.8 Ga at the end of the Hadean. In addition, volcanism was severe due to the large heat flow and geothermal gradient. Nevertheless, detrital zircon crystals dated to 4.4 Ga show evidence of having undergone contact with liquid water, suggesting that the Earth already had oceans or seas at that time. By the beginning of the Archean, the Earth had cooled significantly. Present life forms could not have survived at Earth's surface, because the Archean atmosphere lacked oxygen, hence had no ozone layer to block ultraviolet light. Nevertheless, it is believed that primordial life began to evolve by the early Archean, with candidate fossils dated to around 3.5 Ga. Some scientists even speculate that life could have begun during the early Hadean, as far back as 4.4 Ga, surviving the possible late heavy bombardment period in hydrothermal vents below the Earth's surface. Formation of the Moon. Earth's only natural satellite, the Moon, is larger relative to its planet than any other satellite in the solar system. During the Apollo program, rocks from the Moon's surface were brought to Earth. Radiometric dating of these rocks shows that the Moon is 4.53 plus or minus 0.01 billion years old, formed at least 30 million years after the solar system. New evidence suggests the Moon formed even later, 4.48 plus or minus 0.02 Ga, or 70 to 110 million years after the start of the solar system. Theories for the formation of the Moon must explain its late formation as well as the following facts. First, the Moon has a low density, 3.3 times that of water, compared to 5.5 for the Earth and a small metallic core. Second, the Earth and Moon have the same oxygen isotopic signature, relative abundance of the oxygen isotopes. Of the theories proposed to account for these phenomena, one is widely accepted. The giant impact hypothesis proposes that the Moon originated after a body the size of Mars, sometimes named Theia, struck the proto-Earth a glancing blow. The collision released about 100 million times more energy than the more recent Chicxulub impact that is believed to have caused the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. It was enough to vaporize some of the Earth's outer layers and melt both bodies. A portion of the mantle material was ejected into orbit around the Earth. The giant impact hypothesis predicts that the Moon was depleted of metallic material, explaining its abnormal composition. The ejecta in orbit around the Earth could have condensed into a single body within a couple of weeks. Under the influence of its own gravity, the ejected material became a more spherical body, the Moon. First continents. Mantle convection, the process that drives plate tectonics, is a result of heat flow from the Earth's interior to the Earth's surface. It involves the creation of rigid tectonic plates at mid-oceanic ridges. These plates are destroyed by subduction into the mantle at subduction zones. During the early Archean, about 3.0 Ga, the mantle was much hotter than today, probably around 1,600 degrees Celsius 2,910 degrees Fahrenheit, so convection in the mantle was faster. Although a process similar to present-day plate tectonics did occur, this would have gone faster too. It is likely that during the Hadean and Archean, subduction zones were more common, and therefore tectonic plates were smaller. The initial crust, formed when the Earth's surface first solidified, totally disappeared from a combination of this fast Hadean plate tectonics and the intense impacts of the late heavy bombardment. However, it is thought that it was basaltic in composition, like today's oceanic crust, because little crustal differentiation had yet taken place. The first larger pieces of continental crust, which is a product of differentiation of lighter elements during partial melting in the lower crust, appeared at the end of the Hadean, about 4.0 Ga. What is left of these first small continents are called cratons. These pieces of late Hadean and early Archean crust form the cores around which today's continents grew. The oldest rocks on Earth are found in the North American Craton of Canada. They are tonalites from about 4.0 Ga. They show traces of metamorphism by high temperature, but also sedimentary grains that have been rounded by erosion during transport by water, showing that rivers and seas existed then. Cratons consist primarily of two alternating types of terrains. The first are so-called greenstone belts, consisting of low-grade metamorphosed sedimentary rocks. These greenstones are similar to the sediments today found in oceanic trenches, above subduction zones. For this reason, greenstones are sometimes seen as evidence for subduction during the Archean. The second type is a complex of felsic magmatic rocks. These rocks are mostly tonalite, trondhjemite or granodiorite, types of rock similar in composition to granite, hence such terrains are called TTG terrains. TTG complexes are seen as the relicts of the first continental crust, formed by partial melting in basalt. Oceans and atmosphere. Earth is often described as having had three atmospheres. The first atmosphere, captured from the solar nebula, was composed of light, atmophile, elements from the solar nebula, mostly hydrogen and helium. A combination of the solar wind and Earth's heat would have driven off this atmosphere, as a result of which the atmosphere is now depleted of these elements compared to cosmic abundances. After the impact which created the Moon, the molten Earth released volatile gases, and later more gases were released by volcanoes, completing a second atmosphere rich in greenhouse gases but poor in oxygen. Finally, the third atmosphere, rich in oxygen, emerged when bacteria began to produce oxygen about 2.8 Ga. In early models for the formation of the atmosphere and ocean, the second atmosphere was formed by outgassing of volatiles from the Earth's interior. Now it is considered likely that many of the volatiles were delivered during accretion by a process known as impact degassing, in which incoming bodies vaporize on impact. The ocean and atmosphere would, therefore, have started to form even as the Earth formed. The new atmosphere probably contained water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and smaller amounts of other gases. Planetesimals at a distance of 1 astronomical unit, AU, the distance of the Earth from the Sun, probably did not contribute any water to the Earth because the solar nebula was too hot for ice to form and the hydration of rocks by water vapor would have taken too long. The water must have been supplied by meteorites from the outer asteroid belt and some large planetary embryos from beyond 2.5 AU. Comets may also have contributed. Though most comets are today in orbits farther away from the Sun than Neptune, computer simulations show that they were originally far more common in the inner parts of the solar system. As the Earth cooled, clouds formed. Rain created the oceans. Recent evidence suggests the oceans may have begun forming as early as 4.4 Ga. By the start of the Archean Eon, they already covered much of the Earth. This early formation has been difficult to explain because of a problem known as the faint young sun paradox. Stars are known to get brighter as they age, and the Sun has become 30% brighter since its formation 4.5 billion years ago. Many models indicate that the early Earth should have been covered in ice. A likely solution is that there was enough carbon dioxide and methane to produce a greenhouse effect. The carbon dioxide would have been produced by volcanoes and the methane by early microbes. It is hypothesized that there also existed an organic haze created from the products of methane photolysis that caused an anti-greenhouse effect as well. Another greenhouse gas, ammonia, would have been ejected by volcanoes but quickly destroyed by ultraviolet radiation. Origin of life. One of the reasons for interest in the early atmosphere and ocean is that they formed the conditions under which life first arose. There are many models, but little consensus, on how life emerged from non-living chemicals. Chemical systems created in the laboratory fall well short of the minimum complexity for a living organism. The first step in the emergence of life may have been chemical reactions that produced many of the simpler organic compounds, including nucleobases and amino acids, that are the building blocks of life. An experiment in 1953 by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey showed that such molecules could form in an atmosphere of water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen with the aid of sparks to mimic the effect of lightning. Although atmospheric composition was probably different from that used by Miller and Urey, later experiments with more realistic compositions also managed to synthesize organic molecules. Computer simulations show that extraterrestrial organic molecules could have formed in the protoplanetary disk before the formation of the Earth. Additional complexity could have been reached from at least three possible starting points: self-replication, an organism's ability to produce offspring that are similar to itself, metabolism, its ability to feed and repair itself, and external cell membranes, which allow food to enter and waste products to leave, but exclude unwanted substances. Replication first, RNA world. Even the simplest members of the three modern domains of life use DNA to record their recipes and a complex array of RNA and protein molecules to read these instructions and use them for growth, maintenance, and self-replication. The discovery that a kind of RNA molecule called a ribozyme can catalyze both its own replication and the construction of proteins led to the hypothesis that earlier life forms were based entirely on RNA. They could have formed an RNA world in which there were individuals but no species, as mutations and horizontal gene transfers would have meant that the offspring in each generation were quite likely to have different genomes from those that their parents started with. RNA would later have been replaced by DNA, which is more stable and therefore can build longer genomes, expanding the range of capabilities a single organism can have. Ribozymes remain as the main components of ribosomes, the protein factories of modern cells. Although short, self-replicating RNA molecules have been artificially produced in laboratories, doubts have been raised about whether natural non-biological synthesis of RNA is possible. The earliest ribozymes may have been formed of simpler nucleic acids such as PNA, TNA, or GNA, which would have been replaced later by RNA. Other pre-RNA replicators have been posited, including crystals and even quantum systems. In 2003, it was proposed that porous metal sulfide precipitates would assist RNA synthesis at about 100 degrees Celsius (212 degrees Fahrenheit) and at ocean bottom pressures near hydrothermal vents. In this hypothesis, the protocells would be confined in the pores of the metal substrate until the later development of lipid membranes. Metabolism first, iron, sulfur world. Another long-standing hypothesis is that the first life was composed of protein molecules. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, are easily synthesized in plausible prebiotic conditions, as are small peptides, polymers of amino acids, that make good catalysts. 93, 295 to 297. A series of experiments starting in 1997 showed that amino acids and peptides could form in the presence of carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide with iron sulfide and nickel sulfide as catalysts. Most of the steps in their assembly required temperatures of about 100 degrees Celsius (212 degrees Fahrenheit) and moderate pressures, although one stage required 250 degrees Celsius (482 degrees Fahrenheit) and a pressure equivalent to that found under 7 kilometers (4.3 miles) of rock. Hence, self-sustaining synthesis of proteins could have occurred near hydrothermal vents. A difficulty with the metabolism first scenario is finding a way for organisms to evolve. Without the ability to replicate as individuals, aggregates of molecules would have compositional genomes, counts of molecular species in the aggregate, as the target of natural selection. However, a recent model shows that such a system is unable to evolve in response to natural selection. Membranes first, lipid world. It has been suggested that double-walled bubbles of lipids like those that form the external membranes of cells may have been an essential first step. Experiments that simulated the conditions of the early Earth have reported the formation of lipids, and these can spontaneously form liposomes, double-walled bubbles, and then reproduce themselves. Although they are not intrinsically information carriers as nucleic acids are, they would be subject to natural selection for longevity and reproduction. Nucleic acids such as RNA might then have formed more easily within the liposomes than they would have outside. The clay theory. Some clays, notably montmorillonite, have properties that make them plausible accelerators for the emergence of an RNA world. They grow by self-replication of their crystalline pattern, are subject to an analog of natural selection, as the clay species that grows fastest in a particular environment rapidly becomes dominant, and can catalyze the formation of RNA molecules. 98. Although this idea has not become the scientific consensus, it still has active supporters. Research in 2003 reported that montmorillonite could also accelerate the conversion of fatty acids into bubbles, and that the bubbles could encapsulate RNA attached to the clay. Bubbles can then grow by absorbing additional lipids and dividing. The formation of the earliest cells may have been aided by similar processes. A similar hypothesis presents self-replicating iron-rich clays as the progenitors of nucleotides, lipids, and amino acids. Last universal common ancestor. It is believed that of this multiplicity of protocells, only one line survived. Current phylogenetic evidence suggests that the last universal ancestor, LUA, lived during the early Archean Eon, perhaps 3.5 GA or earlier. This LUA cell is the ancestor of all life on Earth today. It was probably a prokaryote, possessing a cell membrane and probably ribosomes, but lacking a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles such as mitochondria or chloroplasts. Like modern cells, it used DNA as its genetic code, RNA for information transfer and protein synthesis, and enzymes to catalyze reactions. Some scientists believe that instead of a single organism being the last universal common ancestor, there were populations of organisms exchanging genes by lateral gene transfer. Proterozoic Eon. The Proterozoic Eon lasted from 2.5 GA to 538.8 million years ago. In this time span, cratons grew into continents with modern sizes. The change to an oxygen-rich atmosphere was a crucial development. Life developed from prokaryotes into eukaryotes and multicellular forms. The Proterozoic saw a couple of severe ice ages called snowball Earths. After the last snowball Earth about 600 Ma, the evolution of life on Earth accelerated. About 580 Ma, the Ediacaran biota formed the prelude for the Cambrian explosion. Citation needed. Artists' impression of Earth during the later Archean, the largely cooled planetary crust and water-rich barren surface, marked by volcanoes and continents, features already round microbialites. The Moon, still orbiting Earth much closer than today and still dominating Earth's sky, produced strong tides. Oxygen revolution. The earliest cells absorbed energy and food from the surrounding environment. They used fermentation, the breakdown of more complex compounds into less complex compounds with less energy, and used the energy so liberated to grow and reproduce. Fermentation can only occur in an anaerobic, oxygen-free environment. The evolution of photosynthesis made it possible for cells to derive energy from the sun. Most of the life that covers the surface of the Earth depends directly or indirectly on photosynthesis. The most common form, oxygenic photosynthesis, turns carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight into food. It captures the energy of sunlight in energy-rich molecules such as ATP, which then provide the energy to make sugars. To supply the electrons in the circuit, hydrogen is stripped from water, leaving oxygen as a waste product. Some organisms, including purple bacteria and green sulfur bacteria, use an anoxygenic form of photosynthesis that uses alternatives to hydrogen stripped from water as electron donors. Examples are hydrogen sulfide, sulfur, and iron. Such extremophile organisms are restricted to otherwise inhospitable environments such as hot springs and hydrothermal vents. The simpler anoxygenic form arose about 3.8 Ga, not long after the appearance of life. The timing of oxygenic photosynthesis is more controversial. It had certainly appeared by about 2.4 Ga, but some researchers put it back as far as 3.2 Ga. The latter probably increased global productivity by at least 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. Among the oldest remnants of oxygen-producing lifeforms are fossil stromatolites. At first, the released oxygen was bound up with limestone, iron, and other minerals. The oxidized iron appears as red layers in geological strata called banded iron formations that formed in abundance during the Silurian period, between 2500 Ma and 2300 Ma. When most of the exposed readily reacting minerals were oxidized, oxygen finally began to accumulate in the atmosphere. Though each cell only produced a minute amount of oxygen, the combined metabolism of many cells over a vast time transformed Earth's atmosphere to its current state. This was Earth's third atmosphere. Some oxygen was stimulated by solar ultraviolet radiation to form ozone, which collected in a layer near the upper part of the atmosphere. The ozone layer absorbed, and still absorbs, a significant amount of the ultraviolet radiation that once had passed through the atmosphere. It allowed cells to colonize the surface of the ocean and eventually the land. Without the ozone layer, ultraviolet radiation bombarding land and sea would have caused unsustainable levels of mutation in exposed cells. Graph showing range of estimated partial pressure of atmospheric oxygen through geologic time. Photosynthesis had another major impact. Oxygen was toxic. Much life on Earth probably died out as its levels rose in what is known as the oxygen catastrophe. Resistant forms survived and thrived, and some developed the ability to use oxygen to increase their metabolism and obtain more energy from the same food.